The great thing about collage is it can have drawn elements, it can have photocopied elements. The photography doesn't have to be great, and yeah, it allows you to do a lot of interesting different things. It can be simple and sophisticated. It can be subtle and have subtle elements, and it can have subtle color. This one is great just because of how it actually has images that pertain to the topic and just the subtle color behind it. Collage can be busy. If you look at this image, it still sort of lends itself to one or two main images, but the amount of images in the background is pretty amazing. You can have collage that is made up of existing found illustrations. Collage can be just simply beautiful using the found elements, whether it's heavily photoshopped or simply sort of cut out and then having color added to it. Anything else in design, when it's done well, when it has a sense of white space and balance and composition, it can be very effective. There are no hard, fast rules when it comes to collage, so using painted elements, a sense of whimsy, some drawn elements, and a simplicity gives it a very kind of modern but vintage feel. It can be used as illustration. It can be concept-based, be dark and disturbing. It can be completely lo-fi and hand-rendered and cut and pasted and glued. It can have amazing detail, and it can be really well put together with Photoshop, or it can have elements that look like they've been pasted down and drawn on top of. Some collage is just a series of images that are layered onto each other without an actual sense of edging or cuts or paste. It can be monochromatic. It can have a ton of color. Collage can also work in a great editorial way that almost rivals illustration or photography, for introducing elements that can balance and take a story somewhere. The great thing about collage is it still asks us to use all of the design knowledge that we have. So a sense of composition and balance, focal points, secondary elements, everything that we learn about design can be used with collage. So as part of your next project, you are going to use this collage, and it's going to become a part of the Hakai magazine. You are going to design the magazine. Magazines have a few items that are fairly standard. So if you look at the Lone Wolf, the type at the top of the magazine is typically the same each time. That's called our masthead. There's a lot of different types of mastheads, from completely simple and elegant to edgy and interesting. The masthead is it works as a typographic logo for the magazine itself. So in this one, you'll see WAD, and then the descriptor underneath, which is very common in magazines. It says "Wear Different," a magazine about urban fashion and culture. So I've been lucky enough to do probably 10 magazines, designing them from scratch. And the covers are always the most interesting part. Trying to come up with a masthead that is interesting, unique, without just being typesetting something at the top. So here we see Fiasco, which is a series of letter forms that connect. Some of the other things that you're going to need on a magazine, if it's sold on a newsstand, then it's going to have this. It's going to have this little thing right here that gets scanned. It's called the barcode. That is fairly typical with magazines on newsstands. Not all magazines are sold on newsstands anymore. Some of them just get sent out. New York Magazine has been around for over 100 years. Well, probably not 100 years, probably about 60 or 70 years. But really elegant sort of type that never changes. And with this one, they've gone with one single sort of, we call these cut lines. So cut lines are basically the image on the cover of your magazine will typically have a cut line that just describes it and teases it out. So here we have the New York Times magazine, Israel versus Iran. When will it erupt? So they basically done this custom art, and then they use just one cut line. A lot of magazines will use multiple cut lines. So you see this French one. Not only does it have sort of the masthead at the top, but it has multiple cut lines. So along the top, these are probably departments within the magazine, and these ones down the side are stories that you can find inside the magazine. So there's no real hard, fast rule as to how many things you have to have on the cover, but I can tell you from the ones that I've worked on, most clients like to see multiple cut lines to try and draw the reader in to something interesting. So Bloomberg Business Week, so a little bit more standard, not all that interesting, but the other great thing about magazine covers is it typically is your the most time you will spend on a magazine designing it is often on the cover. So typically, if I'm doing a magazine, so the last one I worked on was UBC Faculty of Medicine. It's probably, they probably looked at 5 to 6 different types of covers, so designs. So it's always the tripping point with magazines is trying to settle on a cover. Esquire, again, very sort of famous magazine. So you'll start seeing some similarities with a lot of magazines. A lot of magazines will have the masthead at the top of the page, and then we'll sort of put the cut lines down the rest of the magazine. Sometimes they'll have page numbers attached to them, sometimes not. Elle magazine is a fashion magazine, fairly dated now. Especially this is definitely an older cover. But magazines used to have a really trendy thing to do was sort of this mix of typefaces, and you don't see that as much anymore. But when you look at this one, Clash, still an interesting sort of an interesting play of type on this one, where it's fairly standard type at the top, and then it uses sort of an interesting it looks like a display serif, and then sometimes these covers will incorporate the type themselves, right? So if we're working on collages, you can absolutely think about incorporating topography right into your collage, so it can be part of the actual image itself. So this is a fairly standard approach to magazines, where it has a masthead. You'll see over here, this gives the date, so you often have to do that, so we'll do that on this project. So this is number 156, 2012. So a lot of times it's the it can be fall, fourth quarter, or fall issue 3, volume 22, and then the date. So a little date and versioning up here. These guys have decided to put their website on it. And then you kind of go, your biggest type that you put on there, if you're going to have different size type, is going to address the image itself, and that's what you're seeing here. So a lot of magazines spend a lot of their budget on hiring photographers just to do the cover shot for a magazine. Some can be lots of magazines are very artistic, subtle. They don't all have to be over the top. This is a very beautiful German magazine. So Esquire magazine during the during the 60s and early 70s had an art director named George Lois, who I was lucky enough to meet a few years ago. And during the late 60s and 70s, he did a series of magazine covers that literally changed the way Americans looked at the Vietnam War, looked at sexuality, quite a few different ones. So this is one he did with, it's very, very famous, with Muhammad Ali on the cover. So very, everything he did was sort of provocative. A lot of it was political, but they all tended to be, they're sort of collector items now. And yeah, it was a time where magazines literally changed politics, changed the way people looked at, especially the Vietnam War. This was a very famous Naomi Campbell cover for Vogue that got a lot of attention. Rolling Stone magazine was a magazine still around, but it was it got very well known for its cover design. So it had this overly decorative masthead that it had for years, and it was well known for doing these really cool sort of photo shoots, and then integrating type and not being afraid to actually put things in front of their masthead because they were confident enough that people knew what magazine. Rolling Stone was also very well known for its mix of typefaces and sort of having a visual theme to every cover. So very much hiring a really good photographer for each issue. Vanity Fair is another magazine that has really pushed the boundaries of covers and really balancing type in interesting ways. They're very well known for hiring really edgy photographers, and world famous photographers as well. Vanity Fair also got very well known for doing their Hollywood edition. So originally they started doing these sort of really elaborate photo shoots with actors and actresses, and eventually they got so big that they would actually have to do collage. So they'd end up shooting them in the same studio and then eventually collaging them together. So some of their inside covers could be, as many as like 15 or 20 different people. So they became very well known for that, and it was always a big issue that came out each year. Magazines of today have really taken their cues from a lot of those early magazines like Esquire and Vogue and Vanity Fair. The idea of the masthead has transitioned and changed. Magazines today come and go very quickly. They're incredibly expensive to put together because of all the writing and photography and printing versus making revenue off of advertising. Understanding the style of your magazine is important. So you can see Folio as an example. It really tries to have a bit of an industrial sort of bold news magazine feel to it. So again, you can see things like using thick lines and thin lines and very sort of subtle type that's very structured and grid-like. Another example of that. So taking that same idea and then actually using a cutout for a masthead, which is effective as well. Sort of the exact opposite of a very understated magazine, which the masthead is then reflected into the cut lines as well. Now Makeshift is an example of somewhere in between, where they've actually used a little bit of a drop shadow, all black on the masthead itself, to give it very much a sort of retro 1950s and 60s feel to it. So using the same idea, taking that sort of an industrial labeling feel, Collect sets up all of their secondary information in a very kind of industrial rules, very tight, and then uses a very friendly custom script for their covers. And finally, you can't have a magazine about nature without showing National Geographic, which again has been around for, 60 or 70 years.